and happy Thanksgiving if that's something that you're celebrating. So much like the last video about Leif Eriksson being the actual discoverer of America, the story of the first Thanksgiving is another subject in history class that is often severely twisted. So let's talk about the real first Thanksgiving and a little bit about who exactly made it possible. There was Squanto and the Wampanoag Tribe. The story of the first Thanksgiving that we're all likely familiar with from school is that the Plymouth colonists sat down with a tribe of Native Americans and they enjoyed a peaceful meal in 1621. The end. However, in school, I'm not even sure that I ever even learned the name of the tribe or any information about what happened after. Let's talk about what really happened. We are all likely familiar with the origin story. In September 1620, 102 passengers from England set sail aboard the Mayflower and landed in the New World. After spending the rest of the winter miserably suffering on their ship, they finally went ashore in the spring of 1621 and established a colony known as Plymouth Colony in what is today Massachusetts. By that time, only about half of those who had originally embarked had survived the winter full of disease, scurvy, and exposure to the elements aboard the ship. Upon landing, they were greeted by an English-speaking Abenaki Native American named Samoset. Samoset returned a few days later with Squanto of the Pawtuxet Tribe. Squanto was more proficient in English and would prove invaluable to the settlers. For the next 20 months, he lived with the colonists and acted as a translator with Native American tribes and as a guide to the area. He even taught them how to plant crops native to the area. Another crucial role he played was as a diplomat between the colonists and the surrounding tribes, primarily the Wampanoag. On March 22, 1621, the leader of the Wampanoag Tribe, Massasoit, arrived at the settlement along with 60 of his men. While this is commonly portrayed as being just a friendly gesture, he actually came to broker peace for more practical reasons. His tribe had been wiped out by diseases brought by the previous settlers a few years earlier, and he needed to make alliances to form against his rivals. Thanks to the efforts of Squanto, peace was brokered between the colonists and the Wampanoag that day. In the coming months, it seems Native Americans would frequently come to the crops of the settlers and help themselves. The settlers felt that this was becoming a drain on their resources, especially considering they weren't sure how these new crops of theirs would do. On July 2, 1621, Edward Winslow and Stephen Hopkins, along with Squanto, made their way to ensure that the treaty with the Wampanoag was still in effect and to offer both a coat and a brass necklace. Massasoit was grateful for the gifts and understood their concerns. He assured them that the surrounding villages were still peaceful, and then he sent Squanto to help establish trade routes between those villages and Plymouth Colony. He also pledged to send furs to the colony. Squanto helped to broker peace between other surrounding tribes as well, furthering his importance to the colony. By the fall of 1621, things seemed to be going great for the colonists of Plymouth. The crops were growing well, trade routes were established, and they were currently at relative peace with all of the surrounding tribes. In light of their first successful harvest that fall, Governor Bradford organized a feast that included the Wampanoag. Massasoit and a group of his men attended the 3-day feast. This is where the traditional story of Thanksgiving comes into play. So yes, they did have a feast, but the relationship wasn't always perfect, it wasn't always peaceful, and things were definitely going to get worse in the coming years. This feast would be the first of several subsequent celebrations that the colonists would have. The colonists had celebrations regularly, with the next being in 1623 to celebrate the end of a drought. On another note, in 1637, they had yet another feast, this one being for more brutal reasons. This time it was actually in celebration of the colonial soldiers who had slaughtered 700 Pawtuxet Tribe members in modern-day Mystic, Connecticut. Thanksgivings all around. The peace between Plymouth Colony and the Wampanoag Tribe would remain for the next 50 years, despite the colonists constantly testing their limits by expanding their settlement into Wampanoag territory, exploiting the resources of the Wampanoag Tribe, and spreading European disease to the already decimated Native American population. All of these things combined were just a few of the many straws that would break the camel's back, eventually leading to King Philip's War. As you can see, it definitely was not all rainbows and butterflies like history class might lead you to believe. The peace was often strained, and when it was brokered, it was never just for fun. There was always a true political reason behind it. Thanksgiving as we know it became a national holiday in 1863 by Abraham Lincoln. It was held on the final Thursday of every November until 1939, when FDR moved it up to the third Thursday of every November, and here it remains. Most of those who celebrate it use it as a time to come together, as the version of the first Thanksgiving was originally taught to us. Native American tribes, however, recognize the holiday differently depending on the tribe or who you ask. Some embrace the holiday and its traditional meaning of togetherness and whatnot. Others, however, see it as a day of mourning and use it to remember the millions of Native Americans who lost their lives, their lands, and their culture. I hope this gives you a bit more of an accurate picture of the first Thanksgiving and puts it into context with what was happening at the time and what would happen after. Some of what I mentioned sets the scene for what is to come later on, and in another video I'll talk about King Philip's War, just so you can get a more accurate depiction of just how far these tribes in the area were pushed. I think what I learned most when researching the real first Thanksgiving and everything that led up to it and what was happening at the time was just how important of a role Squanto played to the survival of the colonists and helping them thrive. Squanto wasn't really someone that we talked about in school, and I'm glad that now I know a little bit more about him, and it's upsetting that his role in everything is kind of underplayed. We don't recognize him nearly as much as we should. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.